Good afternoon, everyone. Wherever you are in the world, I hope you and your loved ones are healthy and safe. My name is Randy Bell, and I'm the director of the Global Energy Center at the Atlantic Council. Thank you for joining us for EnergySource Innovation Stream, where we aim to highlight new energy technologies with the potential to reshape the global energy system through discussions with companies and individuals working diligently to bring those innovations to market at scale. Today, we'll be hearing from Andrew Bruce, the CEO of Data Gumbo, on blockchain-based efficiencies in the oil and gas sector. Before we get started, two administrative details. First, you can follow us on Twitter at AC Global Energy, and use the hashtag InnovationStream. Second, after Andrew's presentation, you can submit questions through the Q&A function on Zoom, and I'll try to get to as many of these as I can. If you're watching on another platform like YouTube, unfortunately, we cannot take your questions. So please let me welcome Andrew Bruce to the Atlantic Council. Andrew, thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you for taking the time.
It's our pleasure. So I wanted to ask you an unrelated question before you begin your presentation. And you told me this story earlier, but perhaps you can share with the audience a bit of the history of Data Gumbo's headquarters, where you're working from right now, and how you ended up there.
Well, it's actually not our headquarters anymore, but this is where Data Gumbo started. It is actually an ex-meth lab. So Californians start their companies in garages. We start ours in meth labs. So yes, this is an ex-meth lab.
So it's a bit like Breaking Bad, except for blockchain.
Yes, we certainly don't track our distribution of meth on the chain. That would be unfortunate because people will be able to track it forever. So yeah, no.
So you're saying it's possible, but you wouldn't do it?
It is possible, and we wouldn't do it, and we can't do it because I don't have any meth. But yes, there were 14 people working in here making meth.
Amazing. Okay, well, we will get started. If you can share your screen, once you do that, then over to you.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I'd like to echo what you said. Hope everybody is healthy and staying safe. And thank you for making the time on this crazy time. So quick story about Data Gumbo. We started out as an IoT platform for aggregating data across multiple different industrial sources. That's why we call Data Gumbo. It's not because of my funny accent. It's because we were taking data from lots of different places, putting it in a pot, stirring it up, making it taste good, making it available so that people could do interesting stuff like AI and machine learning. And while we were doing that, we were talking to a major oil company in the Gulf of Mexico, and they were trying to benchmark performance of rigs in the Gulf of Mexico. And while we were doing that, they made the fairly amazing statement that if they could improve one of the KPIs on the rig across their global fleets, they could save $250 million a year. So the specific KPI in this case was drill pipe connections, which is what this picture is. It's obviously a manual one, but I had come from a company that specialized in automating drilling equipment and drilling operations. So I know they can save a minute. And so the obvious question is, why on earth are you not doing it? It's possible. Their average drill pipe connection time is for this company is 6 minutes, and if they could reduce it to 5, then they could save $250 million a year. So they said that they can't get the drilling contractors who own the rigs to work with them to do this, even with the incentive of paying 50-50 of this 250 million savings. So I asked permission. I went to talk to the drilling contractor and I said, why on earth are you guys not doing this? You know that I know that you can save a minute per connection. And the short answer is they said, we don't trust that the oil company as a generalization will ever pay the bonus portion of an incentive contract. They will use the negotiation of the contract to get the day rate down with a promise of paying a bonus, but they will always find a reason not to pay the bonus. So we don't trust them. Completely coincidentally, at the time, I had a friend working for Microsoft, and he was asking me about Bitcoin and blockchain and cryptocurrencies and all this rubbish. And I had come to exactly that conclusion. It was a bunch of rubbish that got no applicability at all for industry. But I started thinking about it, and in order to measure whether or not a drill pipe connection has happened, is actually quite easy. You only need 7 pieces of data to capture the algorithm to determine whether the connection is better or not, and whether you should pay the bonus is actually quite easy as well. Is the latest connection better than the moving average of the previous 6 months? Yes or no? If it is, make a bonus payment, and if it's not, incur a penalty. And you can store the results and all the required data and the algorithms in a distributed ledger, with each company having a version of the blockchain, which means you've got an immutable record that cannot be changed by either party unilaterally. So therefore, you could use it to automate the payment. So I took it to each company and said, hey, here's a way of solving it. It's kind of crazy, but it'll solve it. And to my amazement, they said yes. And then a couple of months later, I was presenting to the International Association of Drilling Contractors, and said, hey, here's a way of automating performance contracts. And they said, well, that's fantastic, because if you can automate a performance contract, then basically you can automate any contract. Was the commodity delivered? Yes or no? If it was, what's the terms of the price book? Make an automated payment, and you've taken away all the monthly reconciliation process. You've taken out all the disputes. You've taken a 14-step manual process, and you've automated the whole process. You can reduce your DSO, or how long it takes to get paid, from industry standard of about 120 days, 90 days, and you can do it daily if you want. And the oil company in this case can do daily accruals, and they get much better visibility into their spend, and they can start to drive efficiencies within their operations. So shortly after that, or maybe at the same time, the Operators Blockchain Consortium was formed. So go to oocblockchain.com, and they started looking into ways of, is blockchain ready for mainstream, and can it be used to drive costs from operations? So long story short, we worked with them on one of their use cases last year, and preliminary results are that they believe that they can save at least 25% of their operating expense using blockchain to automate some of their transactions. So what we do, Data Gumbo, is we provide a blockchain network that people subscribe to. They don't have to build their own blockchain. They don't have to maintain their own blockchain. They just subscribe to it and start to automate transactions. So I've already mentioned that it can be used to reduce DSO. It can reduce operating expenses, but it can also be used for tracking provenance, carbon footprints. So if you're tracking all the transactions in a supply chain, now you can start to track the carbon footprint of your whole supply chain. And you can do governmental reporting. So there's one use case we've got where people want to start doing their own reporting of flaring, so that they can avoid paying penalties. So if you look at the whole supply chain, hydrocarbon supply chain, if you start putting together this network, then you can start getting an overview of your whole operation. So you can start doing joint interest billing, you can do royalty payments, you can track IP. So for example, if you've got some intellectual property and we get paid royalties, you can do that. Some people are looking at automating the providing insurance. So you provide insurance on demand and take a lot of the broker fees out of it. We've already covered automating performance contracts, but then basically any contract. So whether it be people or whether it be commodities, you can take these 14-step manual processes, which have been around since the 1970s, designed for old computer systems. And there's a quick story I tell. My dad used to buy petrol from a petrol station or gas from a gas station, and he'd have a monthly account with the gas station, and he would at the end of the month get the bill from the gas station, and he would decide whether or not he was going to pay the bill, and he'd quite often dispute some of the charges. And then today we go to the gas pump, we swipe the credit card, we pay for the gas, and we don't think twice about it. We're done. Our bank account is debited. So why on earth are we not doing the same thing in the commercial setting? The answer is we can. We've got IoT sensors, we can capture the terms of the contract, and we don't need to go through this whole manual reconciliation process, which costs us an arm and a leg. It's incredibly inefficient. And so, I mean, obviously, oil and gas companies right now are under tremendous pressure to reduce their OPEX. And here's a technology that doesn't cost you anything to install. It doesn't cost you anything. You don't need any new sensors or anything. You can use the IoT sensors you've got in the field, and you can automate the contracts. You've already got the contract terms. You just automate those, connect to the ERP, and now you can automate the transaction flow and take all of the costs out of it. So eventually what you end up is something like this. You've got a blockchain wall where you can start drilling into different parts of your operation, and you can get visibility into the whole transaction flow for your whole business. So I've gone through that really, really, really quickly, but I figured I'd leave time for questions and answers and drill into more details as we go through the Q&A session.
Fantastic. Thank you. That was really interesting. If you stop, oh great, stop sharing your screen. We're already starting to get questions in the Q&A, so we'll be sure to get to those. But if you have them, remember, use the Q&A function, and that will answer them as they come in. But I wanted to start with two questions, or one question, two parts that I had, which is, it seems that two of the functions of your technology are incredibly relevant right now, given what's going on in the world. So first, just everything that has to do with cost savings. So perhaps you could talk through, how much interest you're seeing, given the oil price, in advancing your technology and technologies like this that can really drive down the cost of producing a barrel of oil.
Well, actually, you bring up a really good question. Thank you for that. So, one of the biggest sales hurdle we've had up until now is that, this is going to require change. Excuse me while the airplane goes over my head. This is going to require a change in process. It's not a technology that you install and say, okay, we're going to make a slight incremental change. As I said, it's designed, we've got the processes in place today to take advantage of 20, 30-year-old technology. But here is a technology that, if you change your process, if you take this 14-step process and you just say, okay, we're going to swipe a credit card, or we're going to read a meter, and we've already got the pricing terms, then you can fundamentally take all the cost out of your operation. So long story short is, we in the industry have cut hundreds of thousands of jobs, and I don't think that is the answer this time. We've been cutting since 2014. So I think the answer is technology, and lucky or not, we got to the point where the Operators Blockchain Consortium, the industry as a whole, has proven that this technology is mainstream and that there are real savings, and it's just a matter of turning it on. It's not something that you. So I think that it's perfect timing, to be honest.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So the second part of the question is another element that seems incredibly relevant right now, and this is maybe a bit of a surprise that it's for some at least that it's still relevant. The term ESG was being floated around a ton at the end of last year and coming into this year, with companies, oil and gas companies, making commitments towards climate action. There was some real question if that would still be relevant given all that's going on. But if you look at what Shell announced just today, they're doubling down on their climate change commitments and moving towards net zero by 2050, if not earlier, I think was the message. And so you mentioned that you can use the technology to track carbon footprint. Do you see that as being something that will be a major market for you going forward? And maybe go into a little bit more detail about how that actually works.
Yeah, sure. The way it works is, we can use the same data that we use for automating transactions to automate reporting, right? So we can measure very accurately the efficiency or the utilization of a machine, and we know the efficiency of the machine. So we can measure how much fuel has been used, and we can measure the emissions from that machine. So we don't have to change anything as far as what has been measured. You got the IMO 2020 with fuel bunkering. So we're working on some examples of that. And there's also, as I said, this whole idea of flaring, being able to do self-reporting on flaring, so you can measure the temperature on the flare, and you can determine whether or not a flare is occurring, and you can then look in the regulatory reporting requirements, and also pay fines. So um, I think that it's going to be a growing portion of what we do. I think it's going to be right now. I think everybody is focused on the economics of everything, but as we go forward, I think that more and more the ability to use exactly the same technology. So you're basically using the IoT sensors, and you can put a smart contract in. Smart contract is just an algorithm, say, so you can use it for payment. But you could equally use it for saying, in this event, we need to be able to do a report. So, and then the other thing is, so for the example we use for the truck, the water haulage for the consortium, a lot of that is okay, being able to verify that the wastewater picked up was actually disposed of correctly, and so you know exactly what happened to that water, and so you've got any kind of environmental impact can be measured as you're doing the commercial operation. So I think there's lots of opportunities for doing environmental reporting, and I think, like I said, it's going to become a larger and larger part of what we do.
Yeah, yeah, that's fascinating, and I look forward to hearing more about that as these commitments continue to grow and people continue to focus on their carbon footprint and their environmental impact. So we have three really good technical questions from the audience from Paul Dowding. So we're going to try to go through those. And I am not a blockchain technical expert, though I did do some editing on a report that the Atlantic Council released last year called Assessing Blockchain's Future in Transactive Energy. So I want to give that a plug. And it's by Ben Hertz-Shargel, who I believe is on the call. And so, Ben, if you are, I hope you have a question by Ben and my former colleague, David Livingston. But these three technical questions, we'll probably tackle them one at a time, but they're all pretty good. Consensus computationally expands exponentially with more participants, introduces arbitrary latency and limit capacity throughput. How does your protocol overcome these limitations?
Good question. So we had to build our own blockchain. We did our first prototypes with, I think the industry standard blockchain protocols, but we're in the industrial space. We need to be able to store large amounts of data to verify transactions. We may have to store um, recordings of videos, or we may have seismic data is too big, but we need to store PDFs, we need to store documents. So we need large amounts of data. And so we have to have large blocks. So because you can't have a pointer off chain, because as soon as you have a pointer off chain, then you invalidated the whole concept of a blockchain. So we wanted to store all the data on the chain. We needed to carry, and we also integrate our chain with our IoT platform, which means that the security from the IoT platform gets carried into the blockchain, so that only the authorized participants can see the details of the transactions. And the other thing is we didn't want any cryptocurrencies. We can't do mining because it's bad enough trying to sell a new technology to an oil company without trying to tell them that they're going to transact in gumbo bucks. I mean, we would have been laughed out of the room. So we do consensus with their private networks. We built our own network, and we do consensus across the nodes of a finite number of nodes of the people involved in a specific ledger. So the computational requirements for doing mining or something like that go completely out the window. And the other thing we needed to do is we needed to be able to do consensus on a schedule, so determined by the customer. So a customer may say, I want to do it monthly, I want to do it weekly, I want to do it daily, or I may want to do it on events, like a flaring event. So we had to have the ability to execute or create these blocks on a schedule determined by the customer. And the other thing is we didn't want to have a wallet for an individual. We wanted to have a corporate node. So a corporate node is very much like a database where you have multiple different users of the same database within a corporation. So we have a corporate blockchain where you have administrators of the blockchain, but then you have users of the blockchain. And so it's a completely different concept, but it's the same blockchain concept using consensus. got all the immutability and you got all the security benefits, but we are at our own. So the computational requirements are much less.
Got it. I'm going to follow up with a second question from Paul. And Paul, if we're not answering the questions, you can feel free to jump in through the Q&A and I'll try to get to them. Blockchains require the entire blockchain to be kept in active memory. How do you manage the ever expanding active memory requirement?
Well, the way we work is we host everything in Azure, and so we set up a separate instance for every one of our customers. Some customers want to have it on premise, and so then the setup of the ledgers is a configuration option. So you may decide you want to have a blockchain for a specific asset or a specific rig or a specific region in the world, so you can set up the ledgers and tune the performance based on what you're seeing in front of you as far as the actual utilization and the performance. So that's a configuration option that the customers have got to decide how they want to configure it. So that doesn't become an issue.
Got it. Okay, since I called out Ben by name, I'm going to turn to his question. Can you explain blockchain's value addition in these use cases versus traditional software automation using the same IoT sensors?
Yep, absolutely. So let's go back to that example of the oil company and the drilling contractor. Why is that useful? Why is that interesting? Because the old story is, well, they could just put it in a centralized database. Well, who owns that database? So, I mean, that the issue, going back to the specifics of that issue, is the drilling contractor owns the rig, and they're measuring what's happening on the rig. The oil company is using that rig, and they're measuring what's happening on the rig. So then what happens is at the end of the month, the drilling contractor sends an invoice to the oil company, and the oil company looks at it and says, "Well, that's not what happened. That's not what our data says. Our data says something completely different." So the ability to take the IoT data and put it into a smart contract, which both sides have participated in programming. So I'll give you an example. We just worked on a smart contract between an oil company and a major service company in the Gulf of Mexico. It was a 520-page contract. It contradicted itself in 35 different places. You've got different definitions of execution terms, like what does daily mean? What is midnight? What is a unit of measure? What is the definition of time? Because each company's got a different definition of time. So going through the specifics of exactly what did you mean and what did you intend for this contract, and then so getting each party to audit that smart contract and say, yes, this is the intent of the legal contract. So now you're using IoT data to confirm the execution of a smart contract, which both sides have agreed to, and then you're putting the results of the smart contract, the legal contract, and everything else you need into the block, so that now you've got complete trust because neither party can mess with the data, and both parties have got an exact same copy of the data. So, and neither one owns it in a way that the other party doesn't. So you've taken away this whole concept of, well, my data is right and your data is wrong, and you said, okay, we're going to trust the algorithm which we both jointly created.
So if they can't agree on the definition of midnight, how do they agree on much? Or a better way of asking this question is your job essentially taking away fees from lawyers?
Actually, that's a really good question. Thank you for being a straight man for that. So we've got some legal companies who are saying, okay, this is really interesting. It's a whole new area of business for us, because as we write a legal contract, we are going to write the associated smart contract that executes the terms of the legal contract. So I think we're going to be changing the legal and also the accounting and the audit profession as well. So
yeah.
No, we're providing them a different line of business.
A different line of business, but they can't bill based on arguing what the definition of midnight is, for instance, anymore.
Correct.
That seems like a value add for the world regardless. Okay, another question from an anonymous attendee. What happens if, as the network grows, people in the private network can't agree on a schedule or consensus?
Well, then they probably don't want to use a blockchain. If they can't agree on the schedule, or they can't agree to the terms of the contract, then they probably shouldn't be doing business with each other. So I don't think blockchain can help them.
So it essentially forces them to admit that they're not a good match.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I mean, because it was very interesting going through the process of this one contract I'm talking about, because it was not a love-in. It was I mean, there is a well, I'll leave the specifics out of it, but I mean, but it forced people to sit down and say, okay, yes, we do want to do this. There's monetary value for both sides, and it's in our interest to figure out what midnight is. I mean, basically, what's midnight? It's what time zone are you in? Basically, is the answer to the question. So, but I think the other thing that's coming out of it is that, especially out of the operators blockchain consortium, is templatization, right? So now you can say, okay, I've got a template for delivering commodities. And I just need to change the commercial terms. The prices obviously are going to be different for companies, and the rates and weights and speeds. But those are variables in a smart contract. You don't have to write the smart contract from scratch. So we're starting to see there can be templates of contracts for industries. For a specific company, they want standardization of the execution of a contract across the whole corporation around the world, so you don't get different interpretations of the contract. So I think you're going to see more and more templatization, so that people can say, and in fact, I think what's actually going to happen, in fact, we're starting to see it happen, is here's the contract we had in the Gulf of Mexico. We want to use exactly the same contract in the North Sea. And this is the template. Here's a smart contract. Let's agree on the rates and weights and the commercial terms, the variable terms, and we go. So we can reduce the time for contract negotiation.
That's fantastic. Okay, final question. It's a series of questions from Greg Williams at RigLinks. We'll see how many we can get to, and how they all, if they all need to be tied together or not. It's a big block, so I haven't been able to get through it all right now. But here we go. He says, I have a cluster of events that need to be measured. If there is no data collection point for these events, such as equipment measurement devices, et cetera, how do you manage these types of situations? They have manual recording points that humans are still involved in and have to enter a data point, such as they're doing now? Or are there some operational events that are not automated, such as running upper completions and lower completions, installing control line clamps, rigging up for different events? These items that without automation. What is the end result for those?
That's a good question. So basically, if it's can't be electronically measured, then it's probably not a good case for blockchain, because the whole thing becomes down to automation. So I in my prior life, there was a whole debate around how do you cost justify automation, or how do you cost justify IoT? Well, here's a technology that enables you to cost justify it. So, for example, in one of the use cases we did, they had tank level sensors, and it was not accurate enough, so they put flow meters on there, so that you could determine exactly how much had water or chemical or fuel oil or whatever it is that you're delivering can be measured. And that's in the past would have been prohibitively expensive. But now that you've got a use case and a financial case for it, you can say, okay, that's going to pay for itself in a month. Mm-hmm. So short answer to your question is figure out how to electronically measure it. Otherwise, it's probably not a use case.
Fantastic answer to a very good question. That is all the time we have for today. Andrew, thank you so much. We really appreciate this insight. Andrew has said that he would make his PowerPoint available if anybody's interested. So please just follow up with the Atlanta Council if you are. You can also reach out to Andrew on Twitter. I want to thank Andrew and the team at Data Gumbo for all their help putting this together, as well as the team at the Atlanta Council on the events side, Jackson Starun and Tom Knoll, and then from our Global Energy Center, Olga Kokova, Emily Burlinghouse, and the whole rest of the team who was working on this. We have another one of these tomorrow afternoon, which is focused on AI. It took me a moment to remember what that was. So please check out the Atlantic Council website for more information. Until then, we will see you soon and hope you stay safe and healthy.
Thank you, Randy.
Thank you.